Hello, this is Robert Fulghum, and I'm reading to you from my book entitled Uh-oh. Uh-oh is not in any dictionary or thesaurus, and is seldom seen in written form, yet most of us utter that sound every day, and we've used it all our life long. Uh-oh is one of the first expressions a baby learns, and uh-oh or something like it has been used as long as people have existed. It may be the first thing that Adam said to Eve after he bit the apple, and I know she knew exactly what he meant. Across the history of the human family, millions of distinct sounds have come and gone as we continually reach for ways to communicate with one another. And often the most expressive words we use are not words in the technical sense at all. They are just those shorthand sounds that represent complex thoughts, grunts and moans and snorts and clicks and whistles compounded by facial expressions and physical gestures. Think of all the meanings that came when your mom said, uh-huh, or no, or or huh, or hey, oops, okay, yo, uh, ha, and huh, an almost endless number of others whose meaning and spelling cannot be conveyed with letters on paper. Uh-oh is way up near the top of a list of small syllables with large meanings. We say, uh-oh, to a small child who falls down or bumps his head or pinches his finger. And it means that we know the child hurts, but we also know the hurt is temporary and that the child has the resources to handle the hurt and get up and go on about his business. As the child grows and learns, he will not need to turn to a parent to kiss it and make it well each time he scrapes himself. He will know where to find the band-aids on his own. Uh-oh is the first wedge in weaning a child away from us into independence. The older we get, the more experience and knowledge we have, the more able we are to distinguish momentary difficulty from serious trouble. The more we know that something is, uh-oh, not 911. If I had a chest pain, I might go to an emergency room thinking, oh my God, I've got a heart attack. But if my doctor, who knows a lot about chest pains, had the same symptoms, she might think, uh-oh, gas pains, take an antacid, and go on with her work. Or take another example. What to me is the last gasp of my old truck is simply a repairable electric problem to my mechanic. Uh-oh, there's a short in the ignition wire. One might even come to feel the same way about things that cannot be fixed. From the cradle we know about these things. Rock-a-bye baby, what happens when the bow breaks? In kindergarten we are reminded about these conditions. All the king's horses and all the king's men could not put Humpty Dumpty together again. Because I've been a minister in my life, I'm familiar with death, having been around it often in hospitals and cemeteries. And so if I see my own death coming, my response may well be, uh-oh. Uh-oh, in this sense, is a frame of mind, a philosophy. It says to expect the unexpected and also expect to be able to deal with it as it happens most of the time. Uh-oh people seem not only to expect surprise, they count on it, as if surprise was a dimension of vitality. Uh-oh embraces those common notions of here we go again, and now what, and you never can tell what's going to happen next, and so much for plan A, and hang on, we're coming to a tunnel, and no sweat, and tomorrow is another day, and you can't unscramble an egg, and 100 years from now it won't make any difference. Uh-oh is more than a momentary reaction to small problems. Uh-oh is an attitude, a perspective on the universe. And it is part of an equation that summarizes my view of the conditions of existence. Uh-huh plus oh wow plus uh-oh plus oh God equals aha. Will you hum a little something for me? Why? Well, so I can tell you what key your head is in. I don't understand. Well, your head is a sound chamber, and every sound chamber resonates to certain notes better than others because of the shape and size and construction of the chamber. Oh, I'm a visitor in a high school science class, and the teacher is using me to demonstrate to his class that adults don't know everything. All of his students already know what their key is, and how, and why. I don't. So he sends me off to do some personal research in a small empty room, to hum and haw until I sound a note I really like, one that makes my head vibrate a little in a comfortable and pleasing way. That's easy enough. It's like standing in the shower singing, but with my clothes on and the water off. When the note felt just right, I reported back to the classroom, where the science wizard put me in front of a microphone and said, "Hum for me." So I hummed, and the oscilloscope reflected the wave structure of my voice. "B flat," he announced. "Fulghum, you have a head that's tuned in the key of B flat major. That's a 60 cycle tone with natural overtones of D and F, forming the triadic complex of the chord." Well, later I learned that trumpets and clarinets are also B flat instruments. That means a lot of good jazz is in B flat. And fanfares and marching band music are often written in B flat, which makes it the key of parades and spectacles. At the racetrack, the trumpet call announcing each race is in B flat. The Star Spangled Banner and the Marseillaise are in the same key, and I think the William Tell Overture should be. On top of that, my refrigerator hums in B flat major. The electric motor of the refrigerator gives off a 60 cycle B flat hum, as do all motors that run on 120-volt AC current. That means the washing machine, the dryer, the electric heater, the blender, hair dryer, coffee pot, and all the rest are B flat appliances. What's more, even when no motors are running, there is a 60 cycle leak of energy from all the wall sockets in the house. My house is immersed in B flat, which may explain why a man with a B flat head like me really feels at home there, and also may explain why I feel so good near the refrigerator. I am in harmony with it. Now I know why I sometimes sing the national anthem when I invade the refrigerator in the middle of the night. We're all in B flat together. Speaking of refrigerators, on a very local scale, a refrigerator is the center of the universe. For on the inside is found food essential to life, and on the outside of the door is often found a summary of the life events of the household. Grocery lists, report cards, gems of wisdom, cartoons, family schedules, urgent bills, reminders, instructions, complaints, photographs, postcards, lost and found items, and commands. When the word garbage appears there, somebody had better move the garbage, and soon. The door of the refrigerator is a chronicle of current events not found on TV or in the daily newspaper. There's an important art gallery there, too. Postcards of paintings from museums, scribbles from a child's long rainy afternoon with a box of crayons, a collection of drawings and collages and paintings that come home from school in a steady stream, all stuck to the front of the family fridge. When you no longer have any art on the refrigerator door, something is over. Your children have grown up. And when the art shows up again years later, it means your children have children, because grandparents are suckers for refrigerator art and will put up just about anything offered them by a child of their child. I'd like to sponsor a national contest to see who has the most amazing collection of stuff on their fridge, and produce a book of photographs of refrigerator decor. Each photograph would be accompanied by a page of explanations, including a list of all the items contained inside and on top of the refrigerator as well. This could be the coffee table book of the year. But my refrigerator has nothing on it. What does that say about me, you may ask? It means that you are a nice person who has simply carried neatness in the kitchen one step further than the good housekeeping seal of approval requires. Lighten up. Get some magnets, the heavy-duty kind, and get your stuff up on the door of the fridge. And if you aren't sure about what to put there, consult with your friends. Many people know about what should go on the fridge door and will be glad to advise you. Have you ever been present at one of those archaeological expeditions when the entire contents of the refrigerator, freezer included, is exhumed onto the kitchen counters? Even more bizarre is being in the kitchen at a friend's house when the annual dig is underway. You think to yourself, how can people live like this? From the freezer compartment comes especially interesting bits of history, like a package of mystery meat with freezer burn so bad you don't know whether to bandage it, smoke it, or use it to start a fire. I recall on other occasions discovering such things as a snowball, the corpse of a very small shrew, some ice cream made from snow, a corsage from a wedding anniversary, and several flashlight batteries, all frozen into the last ice age of the freezing compartment of our refrigerator, all placed in safekeeping in the deep cold by various members of the family for their own reasons, and all important to the person who put them there. What should be done with these relics? I ran across an idea from the National Park Service that has some merit. They ask that any historical artifacts found in a park be appreciated by the finder, left in place, and simply reported to headquarters so that experts may deal with removal or disposal. From hard experience, I urge that those who clean out freezers at home follow this park department policy. It has much wisdom in it. Those who reclaim their treasures later on will love you more if they don't have to exhume half-thawed relics from the garbage can. Unless you are happily sound asleep at that hour, 2 a.m. is usually not the best of times. It's an hour often given to pacing the floor in crisis or in grief, or to consoling of wee babes who cry in the night. Telephones that ring at 2 a.m. usually mean trouble, as do sounds made by teenagers arriving home late, disturbed dogs, dripping water, and those unknown creatures that gnaw somewhere in the walls. People talk to themselves about serious things at this hour. But I think of 2 a.m. as feeding time, the time when I've had some of the best meals I've ever eaten. Gourmet eating, all alone, with nobody standing around saying, "You're not really going to eat that, are you?" One memorable night I put away a taco shell full of almond paste and washed it down with a can of Snappy Tom that had been there so long there was rust on the can. I followed that with some celery sticks limp enough to tie granny knots in, and then I ate a whole dish of tapioca pudding that I picked up out of the bowl in one piece. Followed that with the last inch from a bottle of red wine, made way for a scoop of cold chili smeared on rye bread and topped with fig jam. Then a spoonful of peanut butter, a spoonful of jam every now and then to clear the palate, and a couple of glasses of milk to keep things moving on down my throat without jamming up. And finally, I revived a cup of dead coffee in the microwave and went out on the porch to sit and look at the moon and smoke the remaining half of a cigar I hadn't finished before I went to bed a couple nights before. This is a great meal, one of the truly great ones. Another dead-of-the-night dining extravaganza happened because I sat up late reading a book entitled The White Trash Cookbook. There's a recipe in there for rack of Spam. You take a can of Spam, which we just happened to have, left over from a camping trip, and you butterfly the loaf, which means slicing it in thin sections without cutting all the way through. And then you bend the Spam open so you can stick pieces of pineapple in between the slices. See, that's what that half a can of hairy pineapple chunks in the back of the shelf of the refrigerator is meant for. And for garnish, top off with some peanut butter and a few maraschino cherries. And you stick that baby in the microwave for about 4 minutes, and then you open a box of saltine crackers, get a whole quart of sweet milk from the fridge, drink it right from the carton. Take your time and eat it all. You can't get a meal like this in a fine French restaurant, but I've seldom eaten better. The recipes in the cookbooks and the meals we really eat are not the same. just as a road map and the highway it describes are not the same. The map does not tell of sun, road work, grumpy companions, or the games played with children in a car. And the cookbook does not speak of the pleasures of winging it alone in the kitchen in the dead of the night, eating without rules or instructions. Maps and cookbooks help. They have their uses. They are one way of describing reality. But they are not to be confused with the living itself. Meatloaf. Now we're getting serious. Meatloaf. When I say that word, people usually smile. And then I ask, why are you smiling? And then they laugh. Why are you laughing? And they laugh again. Meatloaf. Ha ha ha. Meatloaf. One of the many mysterious powers of meatloaf. Meatloaf is funny. Mom's Cafe at the four-way stop in Salina, Utah is high on my list of great places to eat. Mom's advertises the best in homemade pies, scones, soup, and much, much more. And Mom specializes in liver and onions, chicken fried steak, deep fried chicken, and real French fries and real mashed potatoes. But Mom's doesn't serve meatloaf. I called them long distance to check my facts. The lady who answered the phone was a little surprised that I should ask. Don't you know nothing? Meatloaf is something you eat at home. And it's true. Meatloaf is mostly homemade, mostly made by real moms, by hand, constructed out of what happens to be around. Some hamburger that might be going bad if it isn't used soon, sprouting potatoes, rubbery carrots, onions, salt and pepper and steak sauce, baking drippings, and so forth. And I say and so forth because the list of what's possible to put in meatloaf is too long to tell. And then there's the filler, the meatloaf expander, breadcrumbs, cornflakes, Rice Krispies, oatmeal, whatever. Even dirt would work, I suppose. And some egg to hold the whole thing together. And then it has to be mushed around by hand, kneaded into a loaf, put into the family museum piece, the meatloaf pan, and then into the oven to bake. Served hot with gravy, mashed potatoes, and Wonder Bread. Yes, yes. But don't eat it all. Never, ever eat all the meatloaf when it's fresh. Put about a third of it way in the back of the fridge and forget about it. This is the best part of the meatloaf, the part you are going to eat about 2 a.m. some dark rainy night when you need sustaining. Now, no health department would allow such a thing to be served in a public restaurant, but nothing is better for you. It's a matter of mental health. I've never heard anybody say that they were depressed by eating a cold meatloaf sandwich alone in the middle of the night. Now, I'm a mayonnaise and sourdough bread man myself. I know there are ketchup people and mustard people and even jelly people. And a kid once joined me in this middle of the night feasting, and I made him very happy by fixing him a meatloaf sandwich with gummy bears, grape jam, and Fritos on it. I know it's strange, but it's a free country. Now, I know it's hard to believe, but there are some people who don't like meatloaf. It's true. I remember once at a summer camp, a group of children complained to me about the fact that they were served meatloaf in the mess hall 2 nights in a row. So, in order to deal with that, we made up the meatloaf protest song. And if you are one of those who don't like meatloaf, this song's for you. Eat your meatloaf, whined the mommy at the table. Eat your meatloaf or your teeth will all fall out. Eat your meatloaf, whined the mommy at the table. In reply, all the little children shout, we don't want to eat the meatloaf. Meatloaf is fit for pigs and goats. Red and yellow, black and white, it is icky in our sight. You can't make us shove that nasty down our throats. By the way, if you like the song, you can substitute other items of food deemed deadly by children, such things as liver and lima beans and tofu. Like meatloaf itself, whatever tune you come up with that works for you is also okay. Try the song on your kids, and I warn you, be prepared for a lot of verses. Meatloaf reminds me of other brands of leftovers, especially Thanksgiving leftovers, when the refrigerator becomes the Fort Knox of late-night dining. Let's face it, Thanksgiving is often a strain. You have to dress up, and you have to behave, and there's all that ritual fuss and bother with too many people and too much food. It's exhausting. But 2 nights later is a different story. There's good news in the refrigerator by then. Solid gold leftovers. The pecan pie has ripened and congealed now, so you can pick up a big piece with your hand. The cranberry sauce has matured. The dark meat of the turkey is easy to peel off the bone, and the dressing has transmogrified into something that would give truffles and caviar a run for the money. This is the way dressing is supposed to taste. A true prayer of thanksgiving is in order at this moment. This is not a group activity. It is a private religious experience. For in the holy solitude of the midnight hour, you are taking communion with the spirit of bird and fruit and field. The best moments of past feasts come to mind, and it is at times like these you have no doubt that life is good, that your family, all tucked away in their beds, are royal folks, and that grace abounds. Amen. Leftovers in their less visible form are called memories, stored in the refrigerator of the mind and the cupboard of the heart. These are just a few of mine that came up in the middle of the night this evening. The laughter of a friend, the last embers of a great fire, the long glance of love from my spouse across a room full of people, an unexpected snowfall, the year everything went wrong and turned out right, and a chunk of poetry I learned in high school and had long forgotten. I'm not often aware that I am happy at the moment, but I often remember that I have been happy, especially when I sit in my kitchen in the middle of the night wrapped in an invisible patchwork quilt made of the best moments of yesterdays. These precious things, these leftovers from living on, remain to serve as survival rations for the heart and the soul. You can't entirely live off them, but life is not worth living without them. My solitary late-night forays for food in the fridge are often garnished with such thoughts. I don't go to the refrigerator just to eat, but to think, to sort it all out. And sometimes I think about the other people who must be at the same place in their kitchen at this very moment, doing exactly what I'm doing, hungering as I hunger, wondering as I wonder. We will never get together. There will never be an international convention of us. No kitchen is big enough. But we are bound together. We make up that secret society I think of as the fellowship of the fridge, somehow muddling through, somehow getting by, and not really as alone as we often think we are, after all. I'm going to tell you a love story that has 2 parts. It begins with a description of a tree and ends in the middle of the night at the end of a decade. The tree is at the downhill edge of a long, narrow field in the western foothills of the La Salle Mountains in southeastern Utah. This is a particular tree, a juniper. It's large for its species, maybe 20 feet tall and 2 feet in diameter. For perhaps 300 years, this tree has stood its ground here, flourishing in good seasons and holding on in bad times. Beautiful is not a word that comes to mind when one first sees it. No naturalist would photograph it as exemplary of its kind. It's twisted oddly by the wind, split and charred by lightning, scarred by brush fires, chewed on by insects, and pecked by birds. And human beings have stripped long strings of bark from its trunk, stapled barbed wire to it in using it as a corner post for a fence line, and nailed signs on it on 3 sides. No hunting, no trespassing, and please close the gate. In commandeering this tree as a corner stake for claims of rights and property, miners and ranchers have hacked signs and symbols into its bark and left day-glow orange survey tape tied to its branches. And now it serves as one side of a gate between an alfalfa field and open range. But no matter what, in drought, flood, heat, and cold, it has continued to be there. It's true there is rot and death in it near the ground, but at the greening tips of its upper branches and in its berry-like seed cones there is yet the outreach of life. I respect this old juniper tree, because it's old, sure, but also for its steadfastness in taking whatever is thrown at it. That it has been useful in a practical way beyond itself also counts for very much as well. Most of all, I admire its capacity for self-healing beyond all accidents and all assaults. I sense that there is a will in it, a will toward continuing to be, come what may. Last night I went out for a walk in the darkness of early autumn to check and see if someone had remembered to turn the Milky Way on and turn the wind off. I was drawn back to the cabin by the yellow glow of a reading lamp in the living room, and I stood outside the window for a long time and looked in at my wife, curled up on the couch, sewing hems in a new pair of wool trousers for me. For 17 years, she has been my companion, my friend, my co-conspirator. Yesterday, we were outraged at one another over something that seems trivial now, but the fire of anger is not quite cool beneath the surface ashes. Yesterday, I made her cry in frustration. Yesterday, she was really mad at me. I know I drive her crazy sometimes, and she's not always easy to live with either. Yesterday, old grievances were flung off the shelf where they are somewhat shakily stored. And yet, today, we walked up the road to pick sweet corn from a neighbor's patch and walked back down the road hand in hand, as is our custom. We're pretty good at forgiving. We have to be. The weather of love comes and goes, and we must let it. It is a required condition of loving someone and being loved back. And now, tonight, as I watch her through the window, I see her smile as she carefully fixes my trousers, perhaps thinking to make one leg slightly longer than the other in revenge. She has done this before. The gate we passed through this morning to pick corn was the one attached to the old juniper I mentioned before, and that tree comes back to mind this night as I look in on my wife. I long for the love we have to always be like that tree, with a steadfast ability to take it, a capacity for self-healing and growing on, scars and all, come what may. "How's your walk, dear?" she asks as I come in through the door. "Oh, the stars are still there. The wind is calm, and there's still enough light to see trees." The second part of this love story happens a couple of months later, in the middle of the night. A special night, December 31st, 1990, New Year's Eve. It's the end of a year and the beginning of a new decade. There's a full moon, a blue moon, as a matter of fact, the second full moon in 1 month, a rare event, especially since this one comes on the last day of a month and the last day of a year. If you had looked for me that night, you would have found me sitting outdoors in the snow in front of a crackling juniper wood fire. Clear sky, temperature at 0, still, quiet, windless night. The fire was in front of an unfinished 2-room house on the side of a ridge in southeastern Utah, just above the cabin I talked about before. The woman who was hemming my trousers back there at the beginning of this love story was sitting alongside me on a sawhorse. This little house is ours, and we have chosen this propitious night to dedicate it in some way, to make it special by making memories there on this remarkable night. I read somewhere that the Navajo Indians bless a hogan by wrapping a white string around it to ward off evil and protect its occupants from harm. I don't know if the Navajos really do this, but I do know that evil is usually stronger than string. Nonetheless, the idea of this ritual gesture appeals to needs beyond reason, and I have purchased a skein of white knitting yarn in town to use this night. At midnight, we tie one end of the yarn to the front door handle, and we start walking around the house hand in hand, unwinding the yarn. On the dark side of the house, it is cold, and we hurry, and the yarn gets all tangled up. We cannot see to untangle it, so we keep going, hoping it will reach the rest of the way. By being careful, going slowly, stretching the yarn around corners and over a wall, and working together, we just manage to tie the ends together. The circle of the white string is complete. We shout triumph. We did it! I don't know what all this means. I do know this. It's part of the love story. The next morning, I went up the hill to the house just after daybreak, and the coals in the fire were still hot, and the string still held. And on the back side of the house, where the darkness was, the string had knots and tangles and was stretched almost to the breaking. We could not have fixed it last night. The tangles in darkness had to remain part of the string, or we could have never gone on all the way around. God bless the master of this house. The mistress bless also, tangles and all. A couple of mornings ago, the lady who lives in the houseboat across the way from me was really getting down with Aretha Franklin as the stereo pounded out R-E-S-P-E-C-T, that old song about respect. This happened while the lady was washing dishes, and she was singing along, doing a few good dance movements around her kitchen as Aretha shouted out her gospel-style rock and roll. The lady does not know I was watching her. Nor does she know I have often watched her as she bops around her kitchen singing and dancing, though I'd like to tell her how much I appreciate her spirit-lifting performance. I'm afraid if I say anything, it will make her too self-conscious, and I will have spoiled a good time for both of us. And besides, she can't really sing, that's what she says. When we organized a neighborhood Christmas choir a couple of years ago, I invited her to join us, and she said she had a terrible voice and couldn't carry a tune in a bucket. I can't sing. I never could, she said. How can this be? I have watched. I have heard. I know better. In fact, most people I know claim they can't sing. Why is this? What's going on here? Imagine how it would seem if our educational system evaluated students around, say, 6th grade, and if you did not have clear potential for playing tennis at a Wimbledon championship level, the school and the parents would say, you are not now and never will be a tennis player, and that would be the end of tennis for you forever. No way. We think of sports as a lifetime activity essential to good health. We think that it's important that people play tennis or golf or basketball or hockey, or at least run or walk at whatever level they can for their own good, as long as they can. We don't eliminate organized sports around 6th grade for all except those who seem to have talent and great potential for excelling to the point where they can make a professional career of the activity. That would really be absurd. And yet when it comes to singing, that's exactly what we do. From 6th grade through high school and the rest of your life, if you haven't been labeled as having talent or a good voice, or if you aren't stubborn about it, you will not sing in the choir. And you will grow up at best being a secret singer, as embarrassed to be caught singing in public as picking your nose. If you want to clear a room full of guests at a party, simply announce that we are all going to gather around the piano and sing songs now, and good night. People will make self-deprecating statements about their vocal inadequacies and head for the kitchen, the bathroom, or just go out the door and go home. The same is true on a camping trip. If someone says, let's all sit around the campfire and sing, most people will head for their tents in a hurry, unless they are old people who were around before radio or TV or stereos and don't know any better, but there are fewer of them every day. When I was a high school teacher, I was struck not only by how few students thought of themselves as capable of singing, but how popular lip-syncing to recorded music was. If there was any so-called singing at a talent show, it was most likely this silent semi-ventriloquism, accompanied by air guitar, mimic music, not the real thing. On hiking trips with adolescents, campfire singing consisted of parodied bits and pieces of songs from the radio and MTV. Without the record, the music died. They didn't even know any hymns from church. They didn't go to church. Now, lest this seem like a things ain't what they used to be diatribe from someone with old geezer tendencies, I want to insist that singing is as basic to being human as walking upright on two legs, and that if the professionals have taken it away for themselves, then it is time the amateurs took it back. We don't even sing the national anthem anymore. That's left to some soloist out of the world of professional singers to do for us. It's a performance, one we do not join because we ain't got what it takes to sing. As a nation, we only sing a few things together. Happy Birthday, Jingle Bells, America the Beautiful, Three Blind Mice, and a few other nursery rhymes, and once a year we stumble through something we can't even spell, much less sing well. Old Hang Sign is what it sounds like. And that's about it, except for one other song, which may just be our real national anthem. Before I tell you its name, let me tell you how it came to be, and even better yet, I'll tell you how to get to the very place where it was composed. You'll want to fly to St. Joseph, Missouri. When you get there, rent a car and head due west on Highway 36 for about 200 miles across Kansas until you reach the little town of Athol in the Solomon River Valley. When you get there, ask directions to the farm of Pete and Ellen Rust. It's 1 mile further west, 8 miles north, and then 3/4 of a mile west again. The West Beaver Creek runs through the Rusts' farm, and near the headwaters of the creek, hidden in a grove of trees, is a rough log cabin. The Rusts are real nice people, and they'll be glad to show you the cabin. In return, you should contribute to the fund to maintain and restore it, because this is sacred ground where this cabin stands, the headwaters of American song and the American psyche, what was once known as the Western frontier. I recommend that you sit alone on the grass in front of the cabin for a while, as did the man who built it 128 years ago. His journey was not unlike the one you've just made across the Great Plains of Kansas. He came here from Indiana in 1871 by foot and horseback to this place just 20 miles from the geographic center of the United States, and he came alone. He came to get away, to start over, somewhere out west. His first wife had died of plague, his second from complications after childbirth, and his third wife from injuries suffered in an accident. His fourth marriage, made in haste to give his children a mother, was a bitter disaster, and in his misery he turned to alcohol, and that seriously affected his capacity to carry out his life and work. In desperation, he sent his children to live with relatives in Illinois and left his wife for a destination unknown. This man, who came this long way to build this tiny cabin so far from civilization, was himself a civilized man. Well educated, a doctor, and not just an ordinary doctor, but a trained surgeon. Also a musician who sang and played the fiddle. So he dug in here on his homestead, a long way from anywhere, and he built his cabin with his own hands. While he had indeed escaped from one set of troubles in Indiana, his new life had its own serious hardships. For all our romantic notions about the good life on the great American frontier, the Kansas plains were not paradise. Fierce cold, deep snow, wild winds in winter, and fierce heat, deep dust, and tornadoes in summer. Creeks and rivers that flooded in the spring, and prairie fires, rattlesnakes, plagues of grasshoppers, and a mysterious disease that wiped out half the horse population. The Native American Indians were fighting a last-ditch battle for their way of life and often gave no quarter in their desperation. And then there were all the problems of distance from supplies and distance from help in time of need. A hard place to make a go of a new life. And worse if one had a serious alcohol problem, as did this man. And tough, too, if one got called out in the worst weather to ride long miles to amputate gangrenous feet or dig bullets and arrows out of patients who had no means to pay for the services of a surgeon. Brewster M. Higley, the 7th M.D., was his name. Despite the hardships of his life, he found time to sit on a stump in the sunshine in front of his cabin in the silence of that place and write poetry. Poetry about open country, clear skies, and the great joy of feeling at home at last. He was not one of those whom adversity destroys, rather one of those whose virtues and strengths are catalyzed by tough times. Brewster Higley was one of those who would sing in hell itself. One fall he wrote down some verses about his sense of well-being, filed them away between the pages of a book, and forgot about them. In the spring, a patient who had come to his cabin, browsed the doctor's books as he was being treated, found the poem, read it aloud, and urged the doctor to get it set to music. Doc Higley took his patient's advice and carried the poem with him to Smith Center, Kansas, to share with his young friend Dan Kelly, the local druggist. Kelly had been a bugler in the Civil War. He played several other musical instruments, and he liked to compose songs. So he took the doctor's poem with him that night, and he went to see his girlfriend, Lula Harlan. They sat together on the couch and made music together. Lula's two brothers, Clarence and Eugene, joined in with fiddle and guitar, and before long, a song was born. If you could be transported across time and space to the Harlans' home one Friday night in April 1873 in Smith Center, Kansas, you could join right in with the premiere performance of the new song. They called it My Western Home, but you would know it was Home on the Range. And you would probably sing your lungs out, because if there's one song you likely know by heart, this is it. Home on the Range is our real national anthem. Frederick Jackson Turner would agree. His whole frontier theory of American history is summarized in the spirit of that song. And the song is larger than that. Millions and millions of people all over the world can sing it with you. People who have never seen Kansas or buffalo or deer or antelope, but who understand what the word home means, and who are tired of discouraging words, and who yearn for clear blue sky and a fine day away from the endless traffic of our lives. Brewster M. Higley, the 7th, M.D., moved on from Kansas in time because of age and health, and ever the optimist, he married again, and lived happily with his wife, Sarah Ellen. It turns out that she was the real home he had been looking for. When she was 67 and he was in his 90th year, she passed away. He followed not long after. Died of grief, his family said. And they are buried side by side in the final peace and quiet of a small cemetery in Shawnee, Oklahoma, where seldom is heard a discouraging word, and the skies are not cloudy all day. This happened in the summer of 1959 at the Feather River Inn near the town of Blairsden in the Sierra Nevada mountains of Northern California, a resort environment. And I, just out of college, have a job that combines being the night desk clerk in the lodge and helping out with the horse wrangling at the stables. The owner-manager is Italian-Swiss with European notions about conditions of employment, and he and I do not get along. I think, privately, he's a fascist who wants peasant employees who know their place, and he thinks I'm a good example of how democracy can be carried too far. I'm 22 and pretty free with my opinions, and he's 52 and he's got a few opinions of his own. One week, the employees had been served the same thing for lunch every single day. 2 wieners a mound of sauerkraut, and stale rolls with water. To compound the insult with injury, the cost of the meals was deducted from our paycheck. I was outraged. On Friday night of this awful week, I was at my desk job around 11 p.m., and the night auditor had just come on duty. I went into the kitchen to get a bite to eat and saw notes to the chef from the boss to the effect that wieners and sauerkraut are on the employee menu for 2 more days. Well, that rips it. I quit. For lack of any better audience, I unloaded on the night auditor, one Sigmund Woolman. I declare that I have had it up to here. I am going to get a plate of wieners and sauerkraut, and I'm going to go wake up the owner and throw it on him. I am sick and tired of this crap. I am insulted. Nobody's going to make me eat wieners and sauerkraut for a whole week and make me pay for it. And who does he think he is anyhow, and how can life be sustained on wieners and sauerkraut? And this is un-American, and I don't like wieners and sauerkraut enough to eat it one day, for God's sakes. And the whole hotel stinks anyhow, and the horses are all nags, and the guests are all idiots, and I'm packing my bags, and I'm headed for Montana, where they have never heard of wieners and sauerkraut and wouldn't feed it to pigs, something like that. I'm still mad about it, you may notice. I raved on this way for 20 minutes, and I needn't repeat it all here, you get the drift. My monologue was delivered at the top of my lungs, punctuated by blows on the front desk with a fly swatter, the kicking of chairs, and much profanity. Freedom, unions, uprisings, and the breaking of chains for the working masses was called for. I pitched a fit. And as I pitched my fit, Sigmund Woolman, the night auditor, sat quietly on his stool, smoking a cigarette, watching me with sorrowful eyes. If you were to put a bloodhound dog in a suit and tie, you'd have Sigmund Woolman. He had good reason to look sorrowful. Survivor of Auschwitz, 3 years. German Jew, thin, coughed a lot. He liked being alone at the night job. It gave him intellectual space, gave him peace and quiet, and even more, he could go into the kitchen and have a snack whenever he wanted to. All the wieners and sauerkraut he wanted. To him, a feast. And more than that, there's nobody around at night to tell him what to do. In Auschwitz, he dreamed of such a time. And the only person he sees at work is me, the nightly disturber of his dream. Our shifts overlap for an hour each night, and here I am again, the one-man war party at full cry. Fulghum, are you finished? No, why? Listen, Fulghum, listen me. You know what's wrong with you. It's not wieners and kraut, and it's not the boss, and it's not the chef, and it's not this job. So what's wrong with me? Fulghum, you think you know everything, but you don't know the difference between an inconvenience and a problem. If you break your neck, if you have nothing to eat, if your house is on fire, then you got a problem. Everything else is inconvenience. Life is inconvenient. Life is lumpy. Fulghum, learn to separate the inconvenience from the real problems. You will live longer and will not annoy people like me so much. Good night. In a gesture combining dismissal and blessing, he waved me off to bed. Seldom in my life have I been hit between the eyes with truth so hard. Years later, I heard a Japanese Zen Buddhist priest describe what the moment of enlightenment was like, and I knew exactly what he meant. For there in that late night darkness of the Feather River Inn, Sigmund Woolman simultaneously kicked my butt and opened an everlasting window in my mind. For 30 years now, in times of stress and strain, when something has me backed against the wall and I'm ready once more to do something really stupid with my anger, a sorrowful face appears in my mind and asks, Fulghum, problem or inconvenience? I think of this as the Woolman test of reality. Life is lumpy, and a lump in the oatmeal, and a lump in the throat, and a lump in a breast are not the same lump. One should learn the difference. Good night, Sig. Over the last couple of years, I have been a frequent guest in schools, most often invited by kindergartens and colleges. The environments differ only in scale. In the beginner's classroom and on the university campuses, the same opportunities and facilities exist. There are tools for reading and writing, words and numbers, areas devoted to scientific experiment, labs and workboxes, and those things necessary for the arts. Paint, music, costumes, room to dance are all likewise present and available. In kindergarten, however, the resources are in one room with access for all. In college, the resources are in separate buildings with limited availability. But the most apparent difference is in the self-image of the students. If you ask a kindergarten class, how many of you can draw, all hands will shoot up. Yes, of course we can draw, all of us. If you ask, what can you draw? The response is, anything. How about a dog eating a fire truck in a jungle? Sure, how big you want it. If you ask, how many of you can sing? You'll get all hands again. Of course we sing. What can you sing? Anything. What if you don't know the words? That's no problem. We make them up. Let's sing. Now? Why not? Or if you ask, how many of you dance? Unanimous response again. What kind of music do you like to dance to? Any kind. Let's dance. Now? Sure. Why not? If you ask, do you act in plays? You'll get a yes from everyone. Do you play musical instruments, you ask? Yes. Do you write poetry? Yes. Can you read and write and count? Yes. Well, we're learning that now. Their answer is yes, over and over again. Yes! The children are confident in spirit, infinite in resources, eager to learn. Everything is still possible for them. Yes is their answer. If you try those same questions on a college audience, you get a very different response. A small percentage of the students will raise their hands when asked if they draw, or dance, or sing, or paint, or play, or act. And not infrequently, those who do raise their hands will want to qualify their response with limitations. Well, I can only play the piano, or I only draw horses, or, well, I dance but only to rock and roll, or I only sing in the shower. And when asked why this sense of limitation, college students answer that they do not have talent, are not majoring in the subject, or have not done any of those things since about third grade, or worse, that they are embarrassed for others to see them sing or dance or act. You can imagine the response to the same questions asked of a much older audience, those in the later years of their lives. The answer is not yes, not maybe, but no, none of the above. What went wrong between kindergarten and college? What happened to yes, of course I can? On the occasion of his graduation from engineering college last June, cum laude, thank you very much, I gave my number 2 son an unusual gift. I gave him a possibles bag. Let me explain. The frontiersmen who first entered the American West were a long way from the resources of civilization for long periods of time. No matter what gear and supplies they started out with, they knew that sooner or later these would run out and they would have to rely on essentials. These essentials they called their possibles, for with these items they could survive, even prevail against all odds. In a small leather bag strung around their neck, they carried a brass case containing flint and steel and tinder so they could make fire. A knife on their belt, powder and shot, and a gun completed their possibles. And many survived even when all these items were lost or stolen, because their real possibles were contained in a skin bag carried just behind their eyeballs. the lore of the wilderness won by experience, imagination, courage, dreams, and self-confidence. These were the essentials which armed them when all else failed. So I gave my son a replica of this frontiersman's possibles bag to remind him of this point of view, this attitude. In a sheepskin sack I placed flint and steel and tinder that he might make his own fire when necessary. A Swiss Army knife, the biggest one with the most tools. A small lacquer box that contained a wishbone I saved from a Thanksgiving turkey for luck. A small velvet pouch containing a tiny bronze statue of the Buddha just to remind him of religion. A Cuban cigar in an aluminum tube, and a miniature bottle of wild turkey whiskey just in case he wants to bite a snake or vice versa. Invisible in the possibles bag were his father's hopes and his father's blessing. The idea of the possibles bag was the real gift, and he will add his own possibles to what I've given him. See, his engineering degree simply attests that he has come back home from an adventure in the great wilderness of science. He has claimed a clearing in the woods as his own. The gift of the sheepskin sack is meant to remind him that the possibles bag inside his head is what took him there, brought him back, and will send him forth with confidence again and again and yet again, and that spirit of, yes, of course I can. I invite you now to a commencement occasion, a high school graduation ceremony, very much like your own, I suspect, differing only in the details of time and place, not content or importance. This one is at the Grand County High School in the town of Moab in southeastern Utah, month of May, 1990. It's out of doors. As evening falls on a day at the edge of high summer, and the dusty wind has blown all day, as it has blown here for thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of years. But as the sun drops behind the great sandstone ridge west of town at exactly 8:15, the wind dies, and 3 beats from the bass drum of the school band set the procession of the red and white gowned class of 1990 in motion. Elgar's Pomp and Circumstance March begins. La da 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 dum dum, named out of a speech of farewell in Shakespeare's play Othello. And this music spills its solemn dignity over this scene of passage, this scene of farewell. Mounts the stage steps, an invisible door, as solid as that in the vault of the First National Bank, swings softly shut behind them, locking high school away for them in the safe deposit box of memory. They do not know this, not now at least. The superintendent of schools sitting beside me knows. 25 years ago, he also walked across this very same stage just after sunset, exactly at 8:15. And I want very much to ask him, what does he know now that he didn't know then? But he is sitting very quiet and very still. He's looking into the mirror that the moving lines of seniors are for him. Nothing has changed, and everything is different. After welcomes and the invocation of Almighty God, the salutatorian and the valedictorian say what is always said and always must be said at times like these, for it is the truth. Thanks, teachers. Thanks, Mom. Thanks, Dad. Thanks, school and town and friends and classmates and life. And thanks, dreams. And thanks, hopes. And thanks, then and now. And goodbye, school. And hello, life. Here we come. And next, the commencement speaker, the last adult the high school students must endure. The visiting author, that's me, rises with the polite applause and walks to the podium and in the gathering quiet of oncoming night, he looks out at the people of this little town. Somewhere more than 300 miles above the earth, tonight, a telescope is in orbit. Put there because we want to know more. Put there because we want to see as far out there as we can see. Put there, well, just because. Like the eensy-weensy spider who went up the drainpipe in that song of childhood, we go out and up to know again. Look around you. Where we sit here in Moab at the moment was once fire. All of it. The whole earth was molten rock. Life could not possibly happen here where everything was on fire, but it did. Where we sit at the moment was later underwater. All of it. Thousands of feet of water covered this very place. And then salt. Hundreds of feet of salt. And then sand. Thousands of feet. And then where we sit was lifted up and worn down and lifted up and worn down and lifted up and worn down again and again, and carved by water and the same wind and the same dust that blew all day today. Someday the dust will cover this place once again, and then water will come, and someday fire again, and someday nothing will be here. For a while there were reptiles here as big as diesel locomotives. We take the children to see their tracks, which are close by, and now only the tracks and the bones remain. And there were people in this very place long before. We call them Neanderthal and Cro-Magnon, basket makers and Anasazi, Utes and Spaniards. They called themselves the people who live here, as we do now. We dig through the ruins of their homes and wonder where they came from and where they went and why. A long time from now, perhaps other people will come and dig through our ruins and wonder where we came from and where we went and why we lived as we do. In this audience, it is likely there is someone pregnant with child unborn. In this audience, there are those who do not have long to live. And somewhere out there are those who will marry the members of the class of 1990. Somewhere out there, their homes, their children, and somewhere their graves, out there, somewhere. And in between now and then, there is the need to eat, to sleep, to be dry and warm, to love and be loved. In between now and then, the same struggle of Adam and Eve, east of our own Edens. Good and evil, joy and sorrow, pain and promise, light and darkness, poems and wonder. Star Wars, Indiana Jones, The Hobbit, Little Red Riding Hood, Macbeth, Wagner's Ring, and the eensy-weensy spider, and the story of the people of this little town of Moab, Utah. Suddenly, there's a commotion off to my right. Oh, 2 young men ringing cowbells, wearing cowboy boots, cowboy hats, face masks, and absolutely nothing else, plunge out of the darkness, flash across the lighted stage, and out into the night again, clanging, clanging. We have been streaked. Buck-naked youth has torn a hole in the fabric of our solemnity. The audience shouts, whistles, laughs, applauds. I offer to have the streakers run by again in case anybody missed them the first time. The superintendent of schools tries gamely to suppress his smile, but he cannot. Once again, the wild, young, green, foolish, mad, mischievous mystery of the unpredictable has shot through our lives, energizing the moment with joy. Once again, we have been caught by surprise. At times like this, we always say, well, you never know what's coming next. The speaker knows enough to fold his cards here, for he and the streakers have about covered or uncovered all that's essential for now. Long after the remarks of the speaker are forgotten, the streakers will be remembered. And it's just as well. Surprise is at the core of existence. It's true. You never, ever really quite know what's coming next. The beat of the big bass drum begins anew. The band begins to play. The seniors walk by one as their names are called, and on down the aisle into the rest of their lives, followed by family and friends and time into the night. They know what they know, and know somehow they still have a lot to learn. The lights go out on the stage. The wind has picked up again, and the river rolls on. We are not the stony dry ground over which the wind blows and the rivers run. No, we are part of that energy which gives the wind motion and drives the river to the sea. From way out in space, we shine, a lovely blue point of light in the universe, and a cradle song comes to mind. Twinkle, twinkle, little star.